Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. As promised, doing my second part of the National Defense Strategy 2026 breakdown. I'll be honest, this one's going to be a little bit longer, possibly even longer than than the last video, so I apologize in advance if this is a little bit long-winded, but there's a lot of information, and I'm trying to round out the section here. So we're going to go over China, we're going to go over Russia, we're going to go over Iran, we're going to go over the DPRK, we're going to go over kind of like at the end of this little brief section, there is a kind of like synopsis, etc., that we'll kind of briefly cover as well. So I'm not going to waste your time any more than any more than I have to. So here we go. So starting off with China, obviously here. I think some very important insights to glean from this, albeit small section, but it says a lot. So I'd like to highlight, that there is an acknowledgement that China is already the second most powerful country in the world. I think it's kind of undeniable at this point. I don't think there's really anybody else who would even be in contention for that. Um, and really, the most powerful country that's even been somewhat close to us for a while, like it says. So, um, I think for me, it's really important to see that. Never underestimate your enemy. It's one of the most basic things that really everybody knows from Sun Tzu um, in the Art of War. So, uh, you know, all that to say, it's good to see that admission in there. Um, and it kind of stems into this whole. To be honest with you, I have a pretty healthy section of notes on my second screen here. In this section, because it kind of goes and spills into some really important topics, really that's going to set the course for probably the next couple of decades or more, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. But so as we've probably really over the last like maybe 2 or 3 decades, China's defense spending has gone up, and their manufacturing base have gone up at a pretty impressive rate, to say the least, to put it nicely. So, um, you know, this highlights also that they are capable of spending more money, and they're willing to divert some funds that would otherwise be spent on domestic priorities, domestic programs, to kind of say, oh, we're going to skip that and we're going to put it into our military, which is obviously, that's something that maybe you agree with, maybe you disagree with, but certainly China has demonstrated that they're willing to do that, and something that you have to take into account as well. So, but yeah, it highlights it here too, right? The speed, scale, and quality of China's historic military buildup speak for themselves. Um, including forces designed for operations in the Western Pacific, as well as those capable of reaching targets much further away. So China's trying to become not just a regional power, but they are trying to punch up a little bit towards the United States and say, hey, look, you may have been the preeminent global power for the last, you know, going on, maybe working on 100 years at this point, 100 plus years. But that's not going to be the case anymore if you don't do something to try to kind of um, stop that somehow, right? Uh, the really important section here, though, is when it starts to talk about, and we'll see this here on page 10, the Indo-Pacific will soon make up more than half of the global economy, right? So all that to say, this is a super important region, and I think you turn on the news for 5 seconds on any given day, you can almost kind of see this start to play out, the beginning stages of power struggle, the beginning stages of superpower interest within the region, right? Between China and obviously the United States and some of our partners. Um, and there's some interesting information that I want to highlight from my notes that kind of go to reinforce what they're saying here with this region becoming more than half of the global economy here soon. So some interesting points. So the Indo-Pacific is on track to contribute more than half of the world GDP and consumption in the coming decades. So kind of how we can assess that, right? More than half of the world's population lives within this region. GDP has grown from 9 trillion US dollars in 2000 to roughly 35 trillion in 2021, making it around 37 to 40% of the world's GDP as of 2021. Likely a little bit more than that nowadays. Obviously 5 years on from that last metric that I was able to source there. The region contributes roughly 60 to 70% of global economic or 60 to 70% of global economics in many recent years. Key points around 60. So I think I highlighted earlier that more than half of the world's population lives in this region. It's actually 60% of the world's population. Again, as of recently, that are within this region, and obviously a large part of that is within China itself, India, places like this all make up a very sizable portion. Um, these populations are relatively young, right? So that's another important factor. Uh, Younger, have more expenditure, etc. So places like India, Indonesia, and the Philippines and Vietnam are all relatively young populations that are growing as well. So another key factor there. Another portion of this urbanization and industrialization, right? So they're still in the process of industrializing these nations in a lot of ways, and kind of moving their labor from agriculture to more high productivity manufacturing and service based stuff. Um, so it's kind of moving their economies to maybe something that would be a little bit more akin to post World War II United States uh, ish, maybe. Kind of moving that direction anyway. So, which is, I mean, obviously there's some uh, good things that uh, come as a result of that, right? More or less people in poverty, higher standard of care, just better lives for the people in general. So industrialization is one of the best things that's ever happened to the underprivileged people of the world. Um, but it obviously has its downsides as well. So you can weigh those, but I think the benefits far outweigh the negatives there. So, um, last but not least, to kind of round out this little section, projections suggest that by 2030, Asia Pacific will host roughly 2/3 of the global middle class. So it kind of again points to a little bit of what I said before, right? Where the populations are younger, but there also is an increase in the type of wealth that these people have access to. So, 2/3 of the global middle class, which will reflect hundreds of millions of people moving into higher income brackets, which will then give them, as a result, more money to spend on things that, they just didn't really have the luxury to before, right? So, healthy middle class is super important for any country, any economy to be successful. So, kudos to that region, I guess, for developing and industrializing and doing what they need to do to try to um, really become likely one of the biggest, if not the biggest player on the world stage. So, very important there. Now we'll kind of move on to Russia here. Let's see. All right, moving on to Russia. Some interesting point to highlight here. and kind of what our threat assessment of Russia. They do call them a persistent but manageable threat, but kind of limits that to NATO's eastern members. So um, I guess there's some maybe reassessment on Russia's ability to be able to invade abroad. Really outside of that general region. So um, I think that's a fair assessment. I think the Ukraine conflict has kind of definitely been a little bit of it's left a scar, a blemish on what people thought of Russia. Obviously, not even from like a, oh, is this justified, not justified thing. I think for the most part, really everybody outside of Russia thinks, and probably even a large portion of Russians think that it's not really justified. But I'm talking more so about how people perceived their military presence. So it's certainly a new development, really over the last couple of years that changes how we look at Russia. So um, important to highlight, though, they still do obviously maintain deep reservoirs of military and industrial power. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to maintain this conflict as long as they had. And obviously, they've had help from people like China, Korea, or, North Korea, Iran, etc., as well as shadow fleets of oil, etc., that they've been able to maintain to be able to try to keep their coffers full. But um, we'll kind of see what happens. Another important I guess, side aspect of this is, in order to be able to sustain these type of long wars, you have to have some ability to keep your people invested, right? If you're not able to keep your people invested in the conflict, then things start to get very difficult very fast for people in power, that is. So something to be said there for Russia as well. Um, Obviously, they have the asset of having the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet. Uh, so that's certainly not a bad thing to have if you're Russia. Um, they are continuing to modernize and diversify those tools that they do have. So they have that going for them. Um, but yeah. So and we've seen some new developments of new types of weapons. For instance, they just released. People are calling them tidal wave bomb, or something along those lines in kind of everyday speak. But long story short, it's an unmanned nuclear capable submarine, and it well, after the ad, essentially it's capable of operating um, underwater. It's unmanned. It's nuclear powered, so it's relatively quiet. It's capable of staying underwater for a very long period of time, obviously, um, and it has nuclear capability. And this is kind of a little bit of a demonstration here. And the idea is, I guess the concept is, and the claims that are being made is that, this would be able to go relatively close to shore, be able to launch this device that is nuclear powered, and be able to either kind of in this example, attack certain maybe vital infrastructure, or could be also launched deeper at sea and detonated deeper at sea to be able to create a sort of tsunami. Um, but again, we will see. Not really field tested that we know of, that I've been able to see, and maybe that's still classified. Obviously, I'm not sure. I'm not too obviously pertinent to that, but yeah, I guess it remains to be seen, to say the least. Um, let's see. Kind of goes on to highlight that U.S. forces are prepared to defend against Russian threats to the U.S. homeland. I don't really think that that's necessarily a threat. Certainly not by themselves. But yeah, I guess you never know. Never underestimate your enemy. So um, it also goes on to highlight and say Moscow is in no position to make a bid for European hegemony. So they don't really possess the power capability to be able to influence Europe in a way to kind of make Europe, let's say, I guess for lack of a better term, to become the lapdog of Russia, right? There's just not enough there, uh, militarily, politically, economically, to subvert Europe to Russia's will. Um, Another important aspect: NATO dwarfs Russia in economic scale, even excluding the U.S. or yeah, even excluding the United States. Sorry, um, NATO possesses far more capability economically than Russia, and it's not even close. So, uh, certainly a good aspect. Excuse me, my goodness. Certainly a good aspect to take into account here when we're talking about military threats, right? You have to be able to have the money to be able to back up what you're trying to do, and if the coffers run dry, it gets very difficult very quickly. So, um, yeah, it continues to go on to say, like, that we're not giving up on Europe, we're not leaving it alone. We're continuing to support our allies within the region, but kind of our breakdown is we need to prioritize obviously the United States first, and then China and the Indo-Pacific region. That we kind of talked a little bit about earlier. So, as that's kind of where Europe is losing power economically, as I think we'll talk about somewhere a little bit later on. Obviously, Russia, etc. The future right now is in the Indo-Pacific. That's where the greatest opportunity lies for um, trying to stake our claim on the next maybe 100 years. So, um, kind of highlight again, this is GDP in trillions. Um, Obviously, non-U.S. NATO here at 26 trillion, Russia at 2 trillion. Again, like I said, it's not even close. So, um, here it highlights Germany's economy alone dwarfs that of Russia. Uh, Important that we do start to see a push for NATO allies to take more of a direct approach and a more frontline approach to their defense. By recent agreements to kind of push that GDP expenditure a little bit higher than what it has been. So all that to say, NATO is they're in a good position according to this national defense strategy to be able to take the primary kind of role in Europe's defense, um, and goes on to say that it includes taking the lead in supporting Ukraine's defense, as it should. It directly affects them more. Um, you know, Obviously, U.S. support is still there, but uh, they should be leading that effort as it is their region. It does affect them directly. We don't really have the we don't have as much stake in the game, so to speak, as what Europe would in this instance. So, um, next section here that we want to talk about is going to be Iran. Some good stuff in here as well that we'll talk about. Um, Again, the reiteration that Iran is not going to be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. That's something that we're very invested in. Um, then I think that's the United States put their money where their mouth is there with Operation Midnight Hammer. If you're not familiar with, you've heard about Midnight Hammer most assuredly. But maybe not familiar with just the operational name. Uh, so if you're not, excuse me, I got something stuck in my throat. So if you're not, I'll briefly kind of cover that here. So Midnight Hammer, if you remember, not too long ago, the United States carried out a series of strikes against Iran. That targeted directly their nuclear facilities. That was Midnight Hammer. Some kind of important or key assets or key highlights from that that operation is, let's see here. Let me pull up my notes one second. So we have, all in all, purportedly 125 plus total aircraft involved in this operation, including 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. Those are flying out of Whitman Air Force Base in Missouri, including some 4th and 5th gen fighters for escort, dozens of tankers, and ISR platforms. Munitions that were included were 75, again estimates, 75 precision guided weapons, including 14 GBU 57s, aka those are what we'd call our bunker busters. Those are 30,000 pound munitions there. Let's see, as well as 24 Tomahawk missiles from a U.S. submarine on Isfahan surface targets. So I may have butchered that name, but all in all, a lot of munitions were used, obviously, in that firefight, or not firefight, sorry, in that attack operation. On top of that, obviously, there were cyber operations that were trying to jam Iranian missile defenses and submarines in the CENTCOM area. So there is some before and after photos of this attack, and you can see, kind of focus on this region here is kind of where we're going to see a lot of the damage kind of take place. The main building seems to still be kind of standing, but you can kind of see here, this whole region looks a lot different than it did before. I'm assuming this is material from these mountains here, in the satellite image that's probably being, I don't know if you know much about bunker busters, but they are a rather powerful bomb. They dig and they burrow deep into the earth and then they blow up. So it could cause, some type of avalanches or something like that. Certainly possible, and that seems to be somewhat what happened here. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult to tell, but you do see some scarring of the earth and some blacking of the earth from, presumably, subsequent fires or something along those lines. But yeah, all in all, supposedly, at least according to the Trump administration, the facility was completely devastated. Now, I guess we'll see if that still rings true in the future. I don't know how much, if anything, is capable of being salvaged. But of course, Iran's not going to stop trying to get nuclear weapons. This is something that we're going to have to contend with probably for the next little while here. So, but we do have important allies in the region, as it goes on to highlight. We have Israel in the region, and they kind of, like it mentions, right? They have been able to demonstrate that with our support, whether it be information, intelligence, whatever it might be, armaments, etc. Israel is capable of defending itself. It did so in the 12-day war. It did so in October 7th. Whatever your opinion are on those attacks, they certainly were, successful from their perspective, regardless of how we feel about it, one way or the other. So, that being said, obviously the so-called axis of resistance, as they often are termed, is it's not gone, but it's certainly degraded in its capabilities. Whether it be the Israel perspective, where Israel kind of hampered Hezbollah and Hamas, are very crippled after recent events, but also from the United States perspective with Operation Rough Rider, really made things pretty difficult and pretty rough for the Houthis currently. So as far as Operation Rough Rider, Again, if you're not familiar with this, the Houthis were targeting U.S. vessels in the region and shooting at those vessels. So, if there's one thing you need to know about the United States, it's that you don't attempt to, you don't think about, and you certainly never touch our boats. So, Operation Rough Rider campaign used overwhelming air power to hit Houthi radar, air defense, missile and drone launch sites, command centers, weapon depots, and leadership targets across Yemen. U.S. Central Command led efforts to led efforts under a deter and degrade strategy involving carrier strike groups like USS Harry S. Truman and Carl Vinson. UK joined on April 30th for additional strikes. The operation paused after an Oman brokered deal where Houthis agreed to stop targeting U.S. ships. Key assets and tactics kind of in this operation. Aircraft and ships, Navy carriers launched FA-18s, F-15s, F-16s, firing laser-guided rockets, advanced precision weapon kill systems. Down 40 to 50% of Houthi drones. So it's an important facet here. Is we were able to kind of counteract a pretty good portion of their drones that they were attempting to utilize, as well as destroyers and submarines firing cruise missiles. We hit over 1,000 sites, including factories, ports, the Galaxy leadership. I'm not 100% familiar with that ship, but certainly presumably a good target to hit there. Military bases and high-value individuals. Let's see. Some civilian errors like a Sinan migrant center and oil terminal strikes were unfortunately made. I'm never like a thus is war type of person. Obviously, it's a tragedy when any of those mistakes are made. But it is unfortunately what happens sometimes in war, and we always have to try to do our best to avoid those sorts of things as much as possible. So. It goes on to say counter drone focus. So it emphasized cheap munitions, $25,000 rockets. As far as the military is concerned, if you know if you know a lot about what we shoot, that's pretty cheap. Against pricier Iranian supplied Houthi drones that were roughly $50,000 to $100,000 each. So it's an important aspect again, kind of that I highlighted with Russia is you have to be able to. All right, next is one of the more important parts of the document thus far. Um, it's called the simultaneity problem and implications for Allied burden sharing. Okay, so this a lot of highlighting here in the beginning because it is so information rich. So I'm going to just kind of not necessarily read it verbatim. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but it is important for you kind of to hear it and for it to be talked about. So only prudent for the United States and its allies to be prepared for the possibility that one or more potential opponents might act together in a coordinated or opportunistic fashion across multiple theaters. Um, Obviously, I think we've seen a little bit of this. Not necessarily, military action, but BRICS, for example, has been active, and there is the potential for these nations to try to do something that. Would it be impossible for the United States to defend against? Maybe not. Maybe I don't know. There's no way of knowing without knowing the full situation, but certainly it would be much more difficult than it needs to be when we have so many allies. It goes on to highlight that this would be less of a concern if our allies and partners had spent recent decades investing adequately in their defenses, but they did not. Let's see. Obviously, rare exceptions. I'd say they're probably hearkening towards Israel there. Um, but I don't know. They don't state that expressly, but um, but they go on to say that they are often too content to allow the United States to defend them, which is, I think, undoubtedly the case. Uh, and they liked that because we can kind of see this in Europe. You know, they're cutting defense spending and they're moving that towards public welfare and other domestic programs, social welfare programs, which again, like them, dislike that, those programs mean nothing if your country can't stand on its own. If you're relying on another country to protect you, it's not an ideal situation, and it's I would say it's very very rather foolish. So, um, but it goes on to highlight and say, nor were they the only ones at fault, as the United States often encouraged this sort of behavior because they had a belief that the United States benefited from allies who were more dependent rather than more partner based. So obviously, I believe that to be the case just by looking at history. Um, and obviously, to say that there's no benefits to that, sure, I would say that there's benefits to that, but clearly, I think the benefits are far outweighed by the negatives there, unfortunately. So, um, goes on to say America's alliances and partnerships form a defensive perimeter around Eurasia. Obviously, super important there, but goes on to really highlight the portion that I really want to jump into a little bit deeper here is um, also include many of the world's wealthiest nations. Alliance Network is far wealthier than all our potential adversaries combined. So I do want to highlight this a little bit. And really, I think the best way to do this is I'm just going to show you some of my notes here that I have. So let me pull over my notes here. One second. Um, got them on the Word doc here, and it kind of breaks down the GDPs of these countries, right? So, U.S., Germany, U.K., France, Italy, etc. Um, account for roughly 39% of the world's GDP, um, and around what 43.024 billion U.S. dollars. I'm sorry, that's 43 trillion. Sorry about that. Obviously, Canada goes on to 25 other countries. NATO total 49.4% of the world's GDP. Obviously, there are other allies that we have. It goes on to say 55.3 USD billions. But we also have partners in the Indo-Pacific region as well, right? Those include Japan, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, New Zealand, as well. So, all in all, with all of our allies, roughly 57.3% of the world's GDP is within that core there. So, compare this to BRICS, and you can see, obviously, nothing to shake your finger at here. 28% of the world's GDP. So not necessarily something that we can just completely discount, but certainly not something that you know money talks, so to speak, right? Uh, there, the statement made in the National Defense Strategy is clearly true. The BRICS total is only 30 around 30 trillion total, combined total between NATO and the five here that I told you about is 63 trillion. So it's just roughly double of the uh, potential there. So certainly something to kind of talk about there. Obviously, a vast benefit. Again, if you're able to outspend your opponents, you have a pretty good chance of winning, right? Obviously, have to take population into account there. That's certainly important, especially when you're dealing with people like Russia, who, historically speaking, and even currently in their current conflicts in Ukraine, excuse me, tend to throw bodies at a problem to try to solve it. It's kind of always been their military strategy to some degree, and in their defense in World War II, it worked. Uh, albeit extremely high death counts, but they were successful in helping to fight back the Nazis. So um, it goes on to highlight the new global standard for the that was set forth in the Hague Smith Summit. I'm sorry, the Hague Summit. And if you're not really familiar with that, we kind of touched briefly on that before with the GDP increases. But I'll give you a brief rundown on this again because I think it's important to kind of understand this a little bit more. So Hague Summit was held amid the Russian-Ukraine war, terrorism risks, and Trump's demands for burden sharing. The event drew all 32 NATO heads of state, ministers, and 6,000 delegates. Roots' wartime mindset push condensed the agenda to focus on spending hikes from the 2014 2% target. Key decisions from the Hague Summit: 5% GDP pledge, again up from that 2% goal, trying to really push them to be more self-sufficient. Article 5 reaffirmations, ironclad mutual defense. Trump endorsed despite past skepticism. Threat assessment: Russia as a long-term threat, plus terrorism, hybrid risks. Ukraine support, NATO-Ukraine Council coordination, aid framed as alliance security. There is some important to highlight some side outcomes here as a result of these discussions as well. There's some procurements from Norway and Germany. Cruise missiles for F-35s. The UK got nuclear-capable F-35s from the US. Regional outcomes here: Baltic posture boost, forward defense alignment, and we kind of see a little bit of that in Poland and Latvia, Lithuania, etc., that are taking some steps towards trying to bolster defenses in the possible outcome of further Russian aggression. Some important reactions. Trump was obviously happy. Erdogan praised Trump's ceasefires. Spain opted out initially, hailed as Roots' pragmatic success. So the summit kind of positioned NATO for wartime readiness, or got us more ready, with the pledge potentially injecting trillions into defense amid economic debates. So obviously, again, money talks here. So if we're thinking that to harken back to the beginning of this document, it is only prudent for the United States and its allies to be prepared for the possibility that one or more potential opponents might act together in a coordinated or opportunistic fashion across multiple theaters. In other words, there's the possibility here. Tensions are high. We could have a World War III. We need to be ready for that. And we can't fight World War III by ourselves, or we don't want to, whatever your stance is on that. I would say that even the United States, as strong as the United States military is, as advanced as the United States military is, it would be difficult to sustain that long and that large of an engagement successfully. So, but again, hopefully we never have to test that theory. So, kind of round us out here. Our political allies and partners elsewhere will take primary responsibility for their own defense with critical but more limited support from American forces. I think it's very important here. It's kind of this is what you need to do. This is what we have to talk about. And it kind of goes on here in this next little section that we'll briefly touch on in this video. I might do a deeper dive video on this, but really it's kind of saying a lot of the same things that we talked about before. Just expanding upon those points, it really comes down to these four strategic approaches, if you will. Number one, defend the U.S. homeland. Number two, we want to deter China through strength, not confrontation, because the Indo-Pacific region is I don't not it's not a gold rush necessarily, like it's nothing like that, but that's where the world's economy is. That's the heart of the world's economy, um, increasingly, and probably for the next 100 to 200 years, maybe, assuming nothing catastrophic happens within the region. There's a lot of potential there, so we have to have access to that for American prosperity. Um, Three, increase burden sharing with U.S. allies and partners. Again, we want to help you, but you need to help yourself as well. And number four, perhaps the most important here, supercharge the U.S. defense industrial base. No more of this, one ship taking 2 decades, one program taking, no, we're behind, and now it's going to take us, 30 years to be able to meet the order. We can't do that, right? That's unsustainable. People like, and maybe I'll talk about this a little bit in the next video. China is rapidly increasing their naval capacity. Most of those vessels are smaller scale vessels, and really kind of regional threats. But they're increasingly getting more and more into uh, more extra regional threats and advancements. So it's something that we have to take seriously. So, all that to say, hope you enjoyed the video. Super good content here. A lot of information. Obviously, I'm trying to not spend like an insane amount of time on each of these topics. I could probably make a 10-minute video on each one of these and be super granular and give you a crap ton of data. And if there's desire for that, I'm certainly willing to do that. Um, Upon request. If there's enough interest on to cover something like the Hague Summit, or maybe like a video on the Indo-Pacific region and kind of what that looks like, and kind of break down the players in that region, for example, that type of stuff. Certainly willing to do that. Maybe just drop a comment, etc. Um, and yeah, here before too long, I will be getting up on Twitter. I already do have a Facebook page set up, so follow me there. It's just Primal Logos, same as on YouTube. But again, just thank you for watching. Please, if you're new, subscribe. Tell me, give me feedback. Do you like this type of content? Is this something that do I need to change my approach? I've been, if you didn't see the first video, I've been just kind of ad-libbing, giving you live reactions to most of it. I briefly read through and highlight some stuff, but I'm not scripting any of this, right? It's live reactions. There's things that I didn't think of when I was reading through the document at first that I talk about here. I'm not gonna make it perfect and edited. I could do that. I've done that in the past for other videos on other um, topics, but I want this to be more conversational, so to speak. So there will be stammers, there will be mispronunciations, etc. That happen naturally. Um, because sometimes my brain works, or my tongue works faster than my brain, so to speak. So, um, yeah, all that being said, if you're new, drop a like, hit the subscribe button, and give me some feedback. What do you think? Um, Either way, even if you don't do any of that, I support you. I like you. Thank you for being here, and have a good rest of your day. Bye bye. You have to be able to have your coffers outlast that of your enemies. And now, obviously, the Houthis weren't really ever going to necessarily run us dry of money, certainly in one operation. But we can be more economical with our missile strikes. Using something that only is going to cost $25,000, that presumably we have a lot more of. to be able to attack something that's going to hit their pocket harder, certainly is always going to be a prudent approach when you're trying to deal with somebody that is stressed for money. So, like I kind of highlighted earlier, it does go on to highlight that Iran is even without its current nuclear program and all the pressure we've been putting on them, uh, they're not willing to really engage in any form of meaningful negotiations regarding their nuclear program and how they're going to handle that. So, unfortunately for the time being, it's looking like it's probably still going to be an ongoing point of global contention. So, we'll see how that shakes out over time. Um, it does highlight again. Israel, and this is I think a theme that we talked about probably 2 or 3 times in the last video as well, is that they do obviously maintain a desire to destroy Israel, but Israel itself is demonstrated over the course of the last certainly 2.5 decades, that it's both willing and able to defend itself with critical support from the United States. So, and they again highlight here in the red, Israel is a model ally. I think it's the third time I've read this in this document. So, kind of the what what Israel is as far as an ally goes is kind of what we're hoping, that of maybe Japan, South Korea, NATO, etc. will kind of conduct themselves. Um, so yeah, I agree or disagree with Israel. I know it's a point of contention a lot, certainly as of recent time, but um, they do maintain the ability to be able to defend themselves, and they do not rely on us. They do have a outstanding military that does have to be respected and taken seriously, um, if you're going to try to do something against Israel. So, um, on the other side, though, we do have other partners in that region that are increasingly, with our support again, able to stand up to Iran and be able to defend themselves against, whether it be Iran or the proxies in the axis of resistance that we talked about shortly ago. Because again, while they are significantly degraded at the moment, as we know with terrorist organizations, given enough time, uh, given enough under the radar sort of work, they will be back. You can kill the person, but you can't necessarily kill the ideology. So we will see them again. So yeah, all that to say, and we're providing these new partners, these new allies, with military systems from the United States to be able to try to help strengthen them to be partners in the region and stand against Iran, which is important. So all that to say, I think a measured, a realistic approach here to Iran and the enemies in the region. Um, I like that we're trying to form more partnerships rather than sort of burden all of this on ourselves, and that will become particularly important as we get later into the document as well. So, um, up next, we're going to talk briefly about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the DPRK, as they are often known. Um, so, kind of some interesting points in here. Uh, Again, kind of similar to Russia. They're saying DPRK poses military threat to, again, the Republic of Korea, and Japan in their region, obviously. But increasingly, again, with their nuclear forces becoming more capable, there is potential that they could reach out and touch the United States, in the not so distant future. So, um, any form of military conflict is really um, unlikely, right? They have sure a large force, but it's pretty degraded. I'd say similar to Russia. It's a lot of older equipment It's not very well maintained. It's a lot of old Soviet era equipment where, a lot of times they don't have the expertise or the parts to be able to replace things when they break. Again, you can kind of see Venezuela for some of the stuff that they had that were old Soviet era. Tanks or planes, etc., that suffered that same sort of fate. So um, it is, obviously something that we have to take seriously. But um, as far as threat assessments go, it's really about strengthening Japan and Republic of Korea to really try to um, keep them in check. So that's the important part there.